The encrypted burner phone felt like a brick of ice in her trembling hands. When the deep, terrifying voice on the other end answered, she choked out 7 words that would change her life forever. Your son fell and can't get up. She didn't know the man she was calling controlled the entire Chicago underworld. She only knew a little boy was dying on the floor of her cafe. Within minutes, armored SUVs surrounded the block and the devil himself walked through her door. The relentless Chicago wind howled against the plate glass windows of Oak Haven Coffee, rattling the frames and sending a chill straight through Harper Hayes' thin cotton uniform. It was a miserable, rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon in the Gold Coast neighborhood. Harper, 23 and operating on 4 hours of sleep, stood behind the massive chrome La Marzocco espresso machine, mechanically wiping down the steam wand. Her life was a spreadsheet of impossibilities. Specifically, $42,000 worth of impossibilities courtesy of her mother's, mounting oncology bills at Rush University Medical Center. Every tip, every double shift, every agonizing hour spent smiling at entitled corporate executives ordering $8 oat milk, flat whites went straight to a collection agency that called her incessantly. She was drowning quietly and completely. The bell above the heavy oak door chimed. Harper looked up expecting another drenched commuter. Instead, a tiny figure slipped inside, shaking water from a miniature navy blue Burberry trench coat. It was Leo. He was 5 years old with a mop of unruly dark curls and striking intelligent gray eyes that looked too old for his face. He dragged a heavy leather backpack behind him, his small chest heaving as he gasped for air. "Hey, little man," Harper said, her exhaustion melting into a genuine soft smile. She quickly stepped out from behind the counter. "You're soaked. Where's Maria?" Maria was the high-priced negligent nanny who supposedly looked after Leo. For the past 3 weeks, Leo had been sneaking away from the private playground 2 blocks down to sit in Harper's cafe. Maria, usually glued to her iPhone and puffing on a vape, rarely noticed he was gone until Harper texted the number Leo had recited from memory the first day they met. Leo didn't answer. His face was unnervingly pale. He took a stumbling step forward, his small hands clutching the collar of his coat. "Leo," Harper's voice pitched up in alarm. "Harpy," he wheezed using the nickname he'd given her. I can't catch it." He meant his breath. Leo had severe asthma, a detail he had casually mentioned to her over a hot chocolate a week prior. Suddenly, Leo's wet sneakers slipped on the polished marble floor. His small body pitched forward violently. Harper lunged, but she was a second too late. A sickening crack echoed through the near-empty cafe as Leo's forehead connected with the sharp edge of a solid mahogany coffee table. He crumpled to the floor, motionless for a terrifying heartbeat, before his body seized. A horrifying, high-pitched whistling sound came from his throat as his airways clamped shut in a trauma-induced asthma attack. Blood began to pool rapidly beneath his dark curls, staining the white marble. "Oh my God, somebody call 911!" Harper screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. The 2 other patrons in the cafe, a pair of college students, froze in shock. Harper ripped open Leo's heavy leather backpack, frantically searching for his rescue inhaler. She dumped the contents onto the floor, a handful of crushed crayons, a stray Lego brick, and a heavy matte black satellite phone that looked like it belonged in a military bunker. No inhaler. Leo's lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. His eyes rolled back. He was suffocating. "Maria, you idiot." "Where is it?" Harper sobbed, her hands shaking so violently she could barely operate the zipper of his side pockets. Nothing. Desperate, she grabbed the heavy black phone. There was no passcode lock. The screen illuminated with a single option, a red speed dial icon labeled Papa. Harper didn't hesitate. She jammed her thumb onto the icon. The line didn't even ring. It clicked open instantly, connecting to a secure, untraceable frequency. "Speak," a voice demanded. The word was cold, vibrating with a dangerous, gravelly authority that made the hair on Harper's arm stand up. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. Harper swallowed a sob. "Please," she gasped. "I need help. Your son fell and can't get up. He's bleeding, he's turning blue, he can't breathe. Who is this?" The voice instantly dropped an octave, shifting from cold authority to a lethal, localized earthquake. "Where is my son?" "I'm a waitress at Oak Haven Coffee on Rush Street," Harper cried, pressing her fingers to the wound on Leo's head, her hands slipping on his blood. "He doesn't have his inhaler. He's dying. Please." "Keep him alive," the man ordered. The sheer terror in his voice was masked by an icy, homicidal calm. "I am 2 minutes away." The line went dead. Across the city in the ultra-exclusive penthouse suite of the Langham Hotel, Dominic Russo stood at the head of a massive custom-built conference table. At 32, Dominic was a ghost to the public but a terrifying god to the Chicago underworld. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit, a platinum Patek Philippe, gleaming on his wrist, he projected absolute lethal control. Around the table sat 4 nervous lieutenants of the Rossi Syndicate, sweating through their expensive silk shirts. Dominic was in the middle of acquiring their shipping docks along the Calumet River. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostile takeover enforced by the 2 heavily armed men standing by the penthouse doors. Dominic leaned forward, placing his knuckles on the polished wood. "The price is $20 million, Victor." Dominic said smoothly, his gray eyes the exact same shade as his 5-year-old son's fixed on the rival boss. "And I want your signature on this contract before the ice in my scotch melts or we transition to a far less civilized conversation." Victor Rossi opened his mouth to argue, but the jarring digitized trill of an encrypted phone cut through the tense silence. The entire room froze. Dominic slowly reached into his inner breast pocket. Only 2 people possessed the frequency to that phone, his underboss, Matteo, who was currently standing 3 feet away, and his son's lead security detail. Dominic pressed the phone to his ear. "Speak." When he heard a woman's panicked, sobbing voice instead of his security chief, a cold spike of pure adrenaline pierced his chest. When she said the words, bleeding turning blue, dying, the temperature in the penthouse plummeted to absolute 0. "Keep him alive. I am 2 minutes away," Dominic stated, crushing the phone in his grip. He didn't say another word to Victor Rossi. He didn't look at the $20 million contract. He simply turned and sprinted for the door. Boss Matteo barked already, unholstering his weapon, sensing the catastrophic shift in the air. "Rush Street, Oak Haven Coffee, now!" Dominic roared, his composure shattering. Within 30 seconds, Dominic was in the back of a black armor-plated Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. A motorcade of 3 identical SUVs tore out of the hotel's underground garage. They didn't use sirens. They used brute force swerving violently through the rain-slicked Chicago traffic, jumping curbs and running red lights as pedestrians scattered in terror. Dominic's heart hammered against his ribs like a sledgehammer. Leo, his only child. The only pure thing left in his blood-soaked world after his wife died in childbirth. If he lost Leo, the city would burn to ash. "Call Dr. Evans at Lurie Children's." Dominic barked to Matteo, who was riding shotgun. "Tell him to prep a trauma room and find out where the fuck his security detail is. Maria's tracker shows her at a boutique on Oak Street, boss." Matteo said, his voice grim. 2 blocks away from the boy." Dominic's jaw locked, a muscle ticking violently in his cheek. "When this is over, put her in the ground." The motorcade screeched to a violent halt in front of Oak Haven Coffee, the heavy tires jumping the sidewalk. Before the vehicles even fully stopped, 4 men in dark suits and tactical gear poured out, securing the perimeter with visible firearms. Dominic kicked the heavy oak door of the cafe so hard the glass shattered, raining down onto the floor mat. He burst inside, a towering apex predator of a man bringing the freezing storm in with him. The cafe was dead silent, save for the terrifying whistling sound of his son gasping for air. Dominic's eyes immediately locked onto the scene on the floor. There, kneeling in a pool of blood, was a young woman in a coffee-stained apron. Her hands were pressed desperately against Leo's bleeding head, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was whispering to him, her voice shaking but fiercely soothing. "Stay with me, Leo. Look at me, buddy. Keep fighting." Dominic dropped to his knees, sliding across the bloody marble, heedless of his custom suit. "Leo!" Dominic choked out his large hands, hovering over his son's seizing frame. Harper looked up, terrified by the sudden invasion of armed men and the terrifying aura of the man beside her. "He needs oxygen!" she cried, her voice cracking. "I couldn't stop the bleeding. He tripped. I tried to catch him." "You did good." Dominic said, a rare raw truth slipping through his panic. He slid his strong arms beneath his son, lifting Leo's limp body with agonizing care. As Dominic stood, Leo's tiny, blood-stained fingers weakly shot out, gripping the fabric of Harper's apron with surprising desperation. The boy whimpered, his eyes fluttering open to reveal a haze of pain and oxygen deprivation. "Harpy!" Leo wheezed, refusing to let go. Dominic stared at the small, frail grip his son had on this random waitress. Leo never trusted anyone. He barely spoke to his own grandfather. Yet here he was dying and anchoring himself to this stranger. Dominic's gray eyes flicked to Harper. They were cold, commanding, and left absolutely no room for negotiation. "Get in the car," he ordered. "What I can't, my shift." Get in the fucking car. Dominic roared, his voice shaking the remaining glass in the window frames. Harper didn't argue. Surrounded by massive men with guns and driven by the sight of Leo's blue lips, she bolted out the door and climbed into the back of the armored SUV, plunging headfirst into a world she was never meant to see. The emergency room at Lurie Children's Hospital was completely paralyzed. Normal protocol had evaporated the second Dominic Russo's men swarmed the lobby. Armed guards stood by the sliding glass doors, while Matteo physically cleared a path through the triage area, intimidating nurses and doctors simply through his sheer, looming presence. Trauma won now. The lead pediatric physician, Dr. Evans, shouted, rushing forward with a gurney. He knew exactly who Dominic was, and he knew the cost of failure. Dominic gently laid Leo onto the gurney. Harper had to physically pry Leo's fingers from her apron. "I'm right here, buddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not going anywhere." As the medical team rushed Leo through the double doors, shouting orders about intubation and epinephrine, the heavy steel doors swung shut, severing Harper from the chaos. Suddenly, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright vanished. Harper stumbled, her knees buckling. She crashed into a row of sterile blue waiting room chairs, burying her face in her blood-stained, shaking hands. She smelled like copper-roasted espresso in fear. The waiting room was entirely empty, cleared out by Matteo's men. At the far end of the corridor stood Dominic Russo. He was pacing like a caged panther. The sleeves of his ruined Tom Ford suit were rolled up, exposing forearms corded with muscle and dark, intricate tattoos that peeked out from his cuffs. His white dress shirt was smeared with his son's blood. He exuded an oppressive, dangerous energy that made it hard to breathe in the same room. He stopped pacing. He slowly turned his head, his piercing gray eyes locking onto Harper. He closed the distance between them in 4 long strides, towering over her. Harper shrank back into the plastic chair, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Who are you?" Dominic demanded, his voice a low, lethal murmur that was somehow more terrifying than when he had yelled. "Hey! Harper! Harper Hayes!" she stammered, pulling her knees tightly together. "Why does my son know you, Harper Hayes?" Dominic leaned in closer. "Why did he have a concussion and a near-fatal asthma attack on the floor of your cafe, miles away from his secure location?" Harper's fear suddenly collided with her exhaustion, igniting a spark of reckless anger. She wiped a tear from her cheek, leaving a smear of dried blood on her face. "You want to know why?" Harper snapped, her voice trembling but defiant. "Because the woman you pay to watch him is a neglectful idiot. For 3 weeks, Leo has been wandering into my cafe completely alone. He orders a hot chocolate, sits in the corner and draws. I watch him because nobody else does. Where were his bodyguards? Where were you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Matteo, standing a few feet away, actually grimaced instinctively, reaching toward his jacket. Nobody spoke to Dominic Russo like that and kept their teeth. Dominic just stared at her. His eyes narrowed, analyzing every inch of her face. She was pale, painfully thin, with dark circles under her hazel eyes that spoke of profound exhaustion. Her uniform was cheap and frayed at the hem, yet she had just called out the most dangerous man in the city without flinching. Before Dominic could respond, Matteo stepped forward holding an iPad. In the brief time they had been at the hospital, Dominic's vast intelligence network had already run a complete background check on the girl in the apron. "Boss," Matteo murmured, handing Dominic the tablet. Dominic didn't break eye contact with Harper as he took it. He finally looked down, his eyes scanning the digital dossier. Harper Grace Hayes, 23, no criminal record. Mother Susan Hayes currently undergoing stage 4 chemotherapy at Rush University Medical Center. Dominic swiped the screen, looking at her financials. He paused. $42,000 in debt, delinquent accounts, 2 eviction notices. She was broken, desperate. And yet she hadn't stolen the diamond-encrusted watch off his son's wrist when he was unconscious. Instead, she had held his bleeding head together and fought for his life. "You're drowning in medical debt," Dominic stated, flatly tossing the iPad onto the chair next to her. Harper gasped, her face flushing with humiliation and fresh panic. "How do you know that? Who are you people?" "I am the man who owes you a debt," Dominic said smoothly, his tone shifting into something cold, calculating, and intensely focused. "My son trusts you. He doesn't trust anyone. Given the fact that his current nanny is no longer employed and his security detail is being restructured, I have a problem." Harper swallowed hard. "I don't understand." "You work at that cafe for what, $12, maybe $15 an hour?" Dominic asked, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "For teen, she whispered. I will pay you $10,000 a week. Dominic said, his voice completely deadpan. Your mother's medical bills will be wiped out by midnight tonight. You will move into my estate in Lake Forest. You will watch my son. You will keep him safe, and you will not leave his side unless I permit it. Harper stared at him, her mind completely short-circuiting. 10,000 a week? You want me to be his nanny? I want you to be his shield, Dominic corrected, his gray eyes darkening with a terrifying possessiveness. He called for you when he was dying. That means something to me. You saved his life, Harper. Now you belong to the Russo family. The double doors of the ER suddenly hissed open and Dr. Evans stepped out and, pulling down his surgical mask, his face grim. Dominic whipped his head around, all the power in the room shifting toward the doctor. Is my son alive? Dr. Evans took a deep breath. He is Mr. Russo. But there's a complication. Dr. Evans wiped a visible sheen of cold sweat from his pale forehead, fully aware that the towering, blood-soaked man standing before him held the power to destroy his entire career and his life with a single phone call. The sterile fluorescent lights of the Lurie Children's Hospital emergency corridor flickered slightly, casting long, menacing shadows across Dominic Russo's hardened face. Speak carefully, Doctor. Dominic warned, his voice dropping to a terrifying, gravelly whisper that echoed off the linoleum floors. What is the complication? Dr. Evans swallowed hard, clutching the aluminum clipboard to his chest like a flimsy shield. The severe asthma attack caused profound hypoxia, Mr. Russo. We successfully reversed the airway constriction and his oxygen saturation levels are stabilizing. However, the head trauma he sustained from the fall is significant. Leo has a slow bleeding epidural hematoma. A brain bleed. Harper, still huddled in the plastic waiting room chair, let out a sharp, choked gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her mind flashing back to the sickening crack of Leo's tiny skull hitting the mahogany table at Oak Haven Coffee. Dominic did not flinch, but the ambient temperature in the hallway seemed to plummet below freezing. The lethal stillness that washed over him was infinitely more terrifying than any outward explosion of rage. He took one slow, deliberate step toward the physician. Fix it. Dominic commanded, the two syllables vibrating with absolute uncompromising authority. You have the finest neurological wing in the state. You will fix my son, or this hospital will burn to the ground before morning. We are, sir. Dr. Evans stammered hastily, taking a defensive step backward. Our top neurosurgeon, Dr. Aris Thorne, excuse me. Dr. Aris Kensington is already scrubbing in. We are going to drill a small burr hole to relieve the intracranial pressure and drain the blood. The procedure itself has a high success rate, but the recovery is where the true complication lies. Matteo, standing silently behind Dominic like a heavily armed shadow, crossed his thick arms. Explain. Leo's immune system is already severely compromised from his chronic respiratory issues. Dr. Evans explained, his words rushing out in a frantic torrent. Post-surgery, his stress levels must remain at absolute zero. Any spike in cortisol, any severe emotional distress, or panic attack could trigger another asthmatic episode. If he cannot breathe while his brain is attempting to heal from neurological trauma, the secondary swelling will be fatal. He needs a familiar, deeply soothing anchor during his recovery. His charts indicate he has severe anxiety around medical staff. When he woke up momentarily during triage, he was completely inconsolable until he passed out again. He kept crying out for someone named Harpy. Dominic slowly turned his head. His piercing, stormy gray eyes locked onto Harper. Harper shrank back into her seat, her pulse hammering relentlessly against her ribs. She was just a 23-year-old barista drowning in eviction notices and hospital bills. She lived on discounted ramen and panic. Now, the deadliest syndicate boss in Chicago was looking at her like she was the only viable organ donor for his dying child. She is coming with us, Dominic stated flatly, ending the medical consultation without another glance at the doctor. Prep the surgery. If his heart stops, yours stops Evans. Do you understand? Crystal clear, Mr. Russo. The doctor nodded fervently before turning and practically sprinting back through the double doors of the trauma unit. Dominic closed the distance between himself and Harper. The sheer physical presence of the man was suffocating. He smelled of rain-expensive cedarwood cologne and copper blood. You heard the doctor, Dominic said, looking down at her. You are the anchor. You are the only thing keeping my son's heart rate down. Mr. Russo, please. Harper whispered, her voice trembling violently as she stood up on shaky legs. I care about Leo, I really do. I'll visit him every day, but I can't just abandon my life. My mother is at Rush University Medical Center. She has stage 4 breast cancer. If I don't pay the $7,200 premium by Friday, they are going to stop her chemotherapy treatments. I have to work. I have to figure out a way to keep her alive. Dominic's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking prominently beneath his sharp cheekbone. He didn't offer pity. Men like Dominic Russo didn't understand pity. They only understood leverage transactions and absolute control. He reached into his tailored slacks and pulled out a sleek matte black titanium card. He didn't hand it to Harper. He handed it to Mateo. Mateo, Dominic barked, go to Rush University Medical Center. Speak to the chief of oncology. You will pay off Susan Hayes' entire medical debt retroactively and forwardly. You will upgrade her to a private penthouse suite. You will hire around-the-clock private nursing staff. If the hospital administrators give you any bureaucratic friction, remind them who funds their new research wing. Consider it done, boss. Mateo nodded immediately, pulling out his encrypted phone and striding down the hallway to execute the impossible task. Harper's jaw dropped. The crushing weight of $42,000 in medical debt the relentless collection calls the sleepless nights crying over her mother's fading life erased in 3 sentences. It felt like a hallucination. Why are you doing this? Harper choked out, hot tears welling in her hazel eyes. I am not a philanthropist, Harper. Dominic replied, his voice dangerously smooth. He leaned in, placing a heavy, warm hand on her slender shoulder. The grip was firm, a physical manifestation of a cage snapping shut around her. I am buying your absolute, undivided loyalty. Your mother will receive the care of a queen. In exchange, you will disappear from your miserable apartment in the Gold Coast. You will move into my estate in Lake Forest. You will eat with my son, sleep in the room next to my son, and breathe only when my son breathes. You belong to the Russo family now. There is no negotiation. Harper stared into his cold gray eyes. She was terrified of him, but the relief regarding her mother's life was a euphoric drug. She had no choice. She was making a deal with the devil, and the devil was paying in full. Okay, Harper whispered, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I'll do it. Good, Dominic said, dropping his hand from her shoulder. Enzo will drive you to your apartment. You have exactly 20 minutes to pack your belongings. Leave the uniform in the trash. The Russo estate in Lake Forest was not a home. It was a sprawling modern-day fortress masquerading as architectural brilliance. Situated on 20 acres of heavily wooded private coastline overlooking Lake Michigan, the massive stone mansion was surrounded by a 12-foot wrought iron perimeter fence equipped with motion sensor cameras and biometric security gates. When Harper arrived in the back of the armored Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon escorted by the silent, brooding capo named Enzo, the reality of her new life finally crashed down upon her. As the heavy steel gates slowly swung open, revealing a circular cobblestone driveway filled with luxury black SUVs and men in tailored suits carrying concealed weapons, she realized there was no walking away from this. It had been 36 hours since the horrific incident at the cafe. Leo's surgery had been a flawless success entirely. Due to the terrifying motivation Dr. Evans operated under, now Leo was recovering in the estate's private state-of-the-art medical wing, which Dominic had fully staffed with discreet, highly paid private nurses. Harper stepped out of the vehicle. The freezing wind off the lake whipped her long dark hair across her face. She held her single duffel bag containing her meager wardrobe of thrift store sweaters and jeans tightly against her chest. Follow me, Miss Hayes. Enzo grunted, his eyes scanning the tree line with professional paranoia. He was a massive wall of muscle bearing a jagged scar across his throat that spoke volumes of his violent past. Enzo led her through the towering mahogany double doors and into a breathtaking triple-height foyer. The floors were imported Italian marble reflecting the light of a massive crystal chandelier. It was silent, beautiful, and utterly suffocating. Your quarters are on the second floor east wing, Enzo instructed, as they walked up the sweeping grand staircase. You are adjacent to Leo's room. You will not enter the west wing. The west wing is Mr. Russo's private domain, including his office. If you are caught in the west wing, the consequences will be severe. Understood, Harper murmured, keeping her eyes cast downward. Enzo stopped in front of a heavy oak door and pushed it open. Harper gasped. The bedroom was larger than her entire Chicago apartment. It featured a king-sized canopy bed draped in luxurious cream-colored silk, a private balcony overlooking the turbulent lake, and a massive walk-in closet that was astonishingly already filled with brand-new high-end designer clothing in her exact size. Mr. Russo prefers his household staff to maintain a certain aesthetic, Enzo explained, noting her shock at the Gucci and Prada tags hanging from the garments. Breakfast is served at 7. Leo will wake up shortly. You are expected in his room immediately. Enzo left, closing the heavy door behind him with a resonant thud. Harper walked over to the edge of the bed and collapsed onto the silk duvet. She pulled out her cheap cell phone. There was a text message from her mother. Harper, honey, what is going on? I've been moved to a beautiful suite. They said an anonymous donor paid for everything. Are you safe? Please call me Harper. Smiled through a fresh wave of tears, she quickly typed back, I got a new job, Mom. High-end private nannying for a very wealthy family. They provided the medical benefits. I'm safe. Focus on getting better. I love you. She hit send, tossed the phone aside, and took a deep, steadying breath. She had to be strong. She had to be the anchor Leo needed. 10 minutes later, Harper quietly pushed open the door to Leo's bedroom. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the soft blue glow of various medical monitors tracking the young boy's vital signs. Leo looked heartbreakingly small, swallowed by the massive bed, his head wrapped in thick white bandages. An IV line ran into his pale hand. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed was Dominic. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. In the shadows of the room, stripped of his boardroom armor, he looked exhausted. The ruthless syndicate boss looked for the first time like a terrified father. As Harper stepped onto the plush carpet, Dominic's head snapped up. His gray eyes, usually so cold, burned with an intense, unreadable emotion as he looked at her. He's been asking for you, Dominic said softly, a stark contrast to his usual booming authority. Harper walked slowly to the other side of the bed. She gently reached out and took Leo's tiny, unencumbered hand in hers. His fingers were cold. Hey, little man, Harper whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Leo's dark eyelashes fluttered. His gray eyes, the exact replica of his father's, slowly opened. The haze of painkillers clouded his vision, but the moment he registered Harper's face, the erratic beeping of the heart monitor instantly began to slow down into a steady, rhythmic, peaceful pace. Harpy! Leo mumbled, his voice raspy and weak. You stayed. Of course I stayed, buddy, Harper smiled, blinking back tears. I promised you I wouldn't go anywhere, remember? Leo let out a long, exhausted sigh, his grip on her fingers tightening marginally. Dad said he brought you home, like a stray kitten. Harper let out a wet, genuine laugh, shooting a brief, startled glance at Dominic. Dominic did not smile, but the hard lines of his jaw softened imperceptibly as he watched the monitor confirm his son's stabilizing heart rate. I guess I am a stray, Harper whispered back to Leo. Now get some sleep. I'll be right here when you wake up. Within seconds, Leo was asleep, his chest rising and falling in a deep, unobstructed rhythm. Harper carefully pulled up a chair and sat down, refusing to let go of his hand. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic hum of the medical equipment. The silence between Harper and Dominic was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and profound tension. Maria is gone. Dominic suddenly spoke, breaking the quiet. He didn't look at Harper. His eyes remained fixed on his son. Harper stiffened. Gone. You mean you fired her? Dominic slowly turned his head, his gaze locking onto hers with a chilling, predatory intensity. I mean she no longer exists as a problem for my family. Gross negligence regarding my bloodline carries a heavy penalty, Miss Hayes. A shiver of pure ice ran down Harper's spine. The implication was horrific, dark, and utterly unapologetic. He was reminding her of the reality of her situation. She was sitting in the bedroom of a mafia boss. Are you trying to scare me, Mr. Russo? Harper asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the rapid pounding of her heart. I am educating you, Dominic corrected, standing up. He towered over her, his imposing frame blocking out the ambient light. You have saved his life. I have saved your mother's life. We are inextricably linked now, Harper, but do not confuse my gratitude for weakness. If you ever betray my trust, or if you attempt to take him outside these walls without my armed escort, there is nowhere on this earth you can hide from me. Before Harper could respond to the chilling threat, the heavy oak door burst open. Mateo stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide with unprecedented panic. He completely ignored the sleeping boy and the intimate tension in the room. Boss? Mateo, breathed heavily, clutching a secure tablet. We have a massive problem. Dominic's expression instantly morphed back into the cold, calculating apex predator. What is it? Victor Rossi, Matteo said grimly, holding up the screen. He didn't take the hostile takeover of the shipping docks well. His men just firebombed our warehouse in the south side, but that's not the worst part. Dominic stepped forward, snatching the tablet. Harper watched in terrifying fascination as Dominic's face drained of color, a look of pure, unadulterated murder washing over his striking features. Rossi found out about the incident at the cafe. Matteo whispered, glancing nervously at Harper. He knows Leo was injured. He knows the boy has a new weakness. Matteo swallowed hard, delivering the final fatal blow. Rossi's men have a bounty out on the street, boss. $2 million for the head of the waitress who saved your son. The crushing silence that followed Matteo's declaration was heavier than the humid, suffocating heat of a Chicago summer. The rhythmic, steady beeping of Leo's heart monitor, the only sound tethering Harper to reality, seemed to amplify in the cavernous bedroom, echoing against the imported Venetian plaster walls. $2 million. Harper repeated, her voice a hollow, barely audible whisper that scraped against her throat. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her skin as pale as the silk sheets covering Leo's fragile body. They put a $2 million bounty on me? Dominic did not look at her. His striking angular profile was turned towards the reinforced glass of the windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The storm outside had intensified, violently thrashing the ancient oak trees, but the storm brewing inside Dominic Russo was infinitely more destructive. The muscles in his broad back, visible beneath the thin white fabric of his Brioni dress shirt, pulled taut as a bowstring. "Matteo," Dominic said. His voice was no longer the loud, booming roar that commanded boardrooms. It was a terrifying, hollow octave of absolute murder. "Lock down the estate, activate the titanium perimeter shields, ground the Gulfstream jet at O'Hare, and cancel all outbound flights from the private hangars. I want 50 of our best men stationed on the grounds armed with Heckler and Koch, MP5 submachine guns and full Kevlar. Nobody enters this property. Nobody leaves. If a fucking squirrel touches the outer fence, I want it obliterated." "Already on it, boss." Matteo nodded grimly, his thumb flying across the encrypted screen of his tablet. "I've pulled the guards from the River North casinos. They are en route now in armored Cadillac Escalades." "What about Victor Rossi?" Dominic asked, turning slowly. His gray eyes were entirely devoid of human warmth. "Rossi is heavily fortified inside his compound in South Barrington," Matteo replied, stepping back instinctively from the sheer, radiating fury of his boss. "He has an army surrounding him. He knows you're coming for him." "Good," Dominic murmured, a dark, sadistic shadow crossing his face. "Let him sit in his fortress and sweat. I will deal with Victor Rossi personally, but first we purge the inside." Harper's trembling knees finally gave out. She collapsed into the heavy leather armchair beside Leo's bed, her hands clutching her head. A suffocating wave of a panic attack crashed over her. She was 23 years old. Just 48 hours ago, her biggest fear was whether her manager at Oak Haven Coffee would fire her for being 5 minutes late to her shift. Now a ruthless Mafia cartel was offering enough money to buy a private island simply to put a bullet in her brain. "I can't do this," Harper gasped, her lungs strictly refusing to take in oxygen. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know how to hide from assassins. I don't know anything about guns or cartels or bounties. You have to let me go. If I run, maybe they won't find me." Before she could finish the sentence, Dominic crossed the room in 2 massive strides. He dropped to one knee in front of her chair, his large, calloused hands suddenly gripping her trembling wrists. He didn't pull her, but his grip was an iron shackle firmly grounding her spiraling panic. "Look at me!" Dominic ordered, his voice suddenly shifting from homicidal rage to a deep, commanding anchor. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing. "Please!" "Harper, look at me!" She slowly opened her hazel eyes, tears spilling over her lashes. Dominic's stormy gray gaze locked onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "You are not running," Dominic stated, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for debate. "Out there, you are a dead woman walking. Victor Rossi owns half the police force in this city. If you try to flee, his men will find you before you even cross the Cook County line." "But in here under my roof," Dominic leaned in closer, his face. Inches from hers, the scent of cedarwood and expensive scotch wrapping around her senses. "In here, you are the most protected woman on the face of the earth. I will burn Chicago to the ground and salt the earth before I let a single one of Rossi's bullets graze your skin. Do you understand me? Harper stared into the eyes of the devil, trembling violently. He was a monster to the rest of the world, a man who ordered executions and ran a criminal empire. Yet looking into his face, she saw an unbreakable vow. He was swearing his protection, a vow forged in the blood she had wiped off his dying son's face. Why? Harper whispered, a tear dropping onto his thumb. I'm just collateral damage to you. Why risk your empire for a stranger? Dominic's eyes flicked down to her lips for a fraction of a second before locking back onto her eyes. Because you are Leo's anchor. And whether you realize it yet or not, Miss Hayes, you are no longer a stranger. You are a Russo asset, and nobody touches what is mine. He released her wrists and stood up, smoothing his shirt. The sudden physical distance left Harper feeling entirely exposed, her skin burning where his fingers had gripped her. Just then, the heavy mahogany door to the bedroom creaked open. It was Nurse Gable, the senior night nurse Dominic had hired from an elite, ultra-expensive private medical agency in Manhattan. She was a stern woman in her 50s, carrying a small, stainless steel medical tray holding a single syringe filled with a cloudy fluid. "Excuse me, Mr. Russo." Nurse Gable said, her voice strictly professional, her eyes purposefully avoiding the armed underboss in the corner of the room. "It is time for Leo's intravenous antibiotics to prevent any secondary infections from the cranial surgery." Dominic nodded curtly, waving her in. "Proceed." Nurse Gable walked to the side of the bed opposite Harper. She tapped the syringe with her gloved finger, pushing a tiny bead of the cloudy liquid out of the needle. She reached for Leo's IV port. Harper watched the woman's hands. Having spent the last 5 years navigating her mother's grueling oncology treatments, Harper had spent thousands of hours staring at IV lines, medication protocols, and nursing procedures. Something was wrong. The antibiotics Leo had been receiving from Dr. Evans were broad-spectrum rocephin, a fluid that was distinctly clear, sometimes tinged with a faint yellowish hue. The liquid in Nurse Gable's syringe was milky white, thick, and completely opaque. It looked exactly like propofol or perhaps potassium chloride, a lethal injection that would stop a 5-year-old's weakened heart in less than 30 seconds. Nurse Gable's hand was shaking. Just a tiny, imperceptible tremor, but Harper saw it. "Stop!" Harper said, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. Nurse Gable froze the needle, hovering a millimeter away from the plastic IV port. "Excuse me, Miss Hayes," the nurse said, forcing a tight, condescending smile. "I am administering prescribed medication." "That's not his antibiotic," Harper said, standing up. The exhaustion vanished from her body, instantly replaced by the fierce primal adrenaline of a protector. "His antibiotics are clear. What is in that syringe?" Dominic instantly stepped forward, the atmosphere in the room turning lethal. "What is she talking about, Gable?" "The young lady is mistaken." Nurse Gable stammered, sweat breaking out on her forehead. She quickly tried to plunge the needle into the port. "It's a new compound." Harper didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She lunged across the bed, violently slapping the nurse's wrist. The stainless steel tray crashed to the floor, and the syringe went flying across the room, shattering against the Venetian plaster wall. The milky fluid splattered against the baseboards. "You crazy bitch!" Nurse Gable shrieked, dropping her professional facade completely. She lunged toward her scrub pockets, reaching for something hidden inside. Before the nurse could even withdraw her hand, Dominic moved with terrifying, blinding speed. He grabbed the woman by her throat, lifting her entirely off the ground with one massive arm, and slammed her against the wall. The impact rattled the medical monitors. Mateo already had his Glock 19 drawn, aiming it squarely at the choking woman's head. "Check her pockets." Dominic snarled his fingers, crushing Gable's windpipe just enough to keep her conscious but entirely incapacitated. Mateo quickly patted the woman down, pulling a sleek, silenced Sig Sauer P238 pistol from her right scrub pocket. It was a professional hitman's weapon. $2 million. Nurse Gable choked out, blood spilling over her teeth as she stared at Harper with venomous hatred. Rossi's men, they wired it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I just had to stop the boy's heart and put a bullet in the waitress. Dominic's gray eyes turned pitch black. The air in the room grew completely stagnant. "You came into my home, you stood over my son's bed, and you thought you would live to spend that money?" He didn't yell, he didn't scream, he simply looked at Mateo. "Take her down to the soundproof interrogation rooms in the sub-basement." Dominic ordered smoothly, his grip tightening until the woman's eyes rolled back. Keep her alive. I want to know exactly how Rossi bypassed the background checks. I will be down in 10 minutes. Dominic released his grip and Nurse Gable crumpled to the floor, gasping violently for air. Enzo stepped into the room, grabbed the woman by her hair, and dragged her out into the hallway, leaving a trail of absolute terror in his wake. Dominic stood perfectly still for a moment, his broad chest heaving as he stared at the shattered syringe on the floor. The acid burned through the carpet. Potassium chloride. It would have killed Leo instantly. He slowly turned his head to look at Harper. She was standing by the bed, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her hands hovering protectively over Leo's sleeping form. She had just saved his son's life. Again. The transaction was over. This was no longer a business arrangement. The sub-basement of the Lake Forest estate was a place that did not exist on any official architectural blueprint. It was a concrete purgatory completely isolated from the luxurious marble and silk of the floors above. For 2 agonizing hours, Harper sat on the edge of the silk canopy bed in her private room, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. Even though the walls were soundproofed, her imagination supplied the horrifying auditory details of what Dominic Russo was doing to the woman who had tried to murder his child. When Dominic finally returned to the second floor, the midnight shadows had swallowed the estate. He didn't go to his own quarters in the West Wing. He walked straight into Harper's bedroom, bypassing the heavy oak door without knocking. Harper flinched, her eyes shooting up. Dominic stood in the doorway. His suit jacket was gone. The crisp white Brioni shirt he had been wearing was stained with dark, violent streaks of crimson blood. The sleeves were rolled up over his heavily tattooed forearms, and his knuckles were raw and split open. He looked exactly like the monster the newspapers painted him to be, the ruthless, unhinged boss of the Chicago underworld. But when his stormy gray eyes met hers, the violence receded, leaving behind a profound, terrifying exhaustion. He walked to the small crystal decanter of Macallan 25 sitting on the mahogany dresser, poured a solid 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, and downed it in one fluid motion. He set the glass down with a heavy clink. Rossi didn't just wire her money. Dominic spoke, his voice gravelly and low, echoing in the quiet bedroom. He promised her immunity. He told her that my empire was crumbling, that my son's weakness was my undoing. Rossi is planning a full-scale assault on the supply chains tomorrow night. He thinks because my son is injured, I am distracted. He thinks he can bleed me out while I sit by Leo's bed. Harper swallowed hard, gripping the silk duvet. What are you going to do? Dominic turned to fully face her. The heavy, calculating gaze he fixed on her made the breath catch in her throat. I am going to slaughter Victor Rossi. I'm going to dismantle his cartel brick by bloody brick, and I'm going to hang his body from the Calumet River Bridge as a warning to every other syndicate in this country. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. But I cannot go to war knowing my son and the woman keeping him alive are vulnerable. My security perimeter is flawless against an outside attack, but Gable proved that Rossi can infiltrate my walls using money. $2 million is enough to tempt even my most trusted guards. As long as you are Harper Hayes, the waitress, you are an expendable target, an outsider. Harper's heart began to hammer wildly. She didn't like the cold, strategic calculation in his eyes. What are you saying? Dominic closed the distance, stopping right at the edge of the bed. He reached into his blood-stained pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply held it in the palm of his large, bruised hand. I am saying that I am removing the bounty from your head permanently. Dominic stated, his tone devoid of any romantic inflection. It was a pure, tactical command. In the Mafia, there is only one absolute rule that no syndicate, not even the reckless Victor Rossi, dares to break. You do not touch a Don's wife. It violates the sacred laws of Omerta. If you kill a made man's wife, the ruling commission in New York will sanction the execution of your entire bloodline. It is a suicide mission. Harper stopped breathing. The room spun wildly. Wife! Tomorrow morning, the Chicago Tribune and the Wall Street Journal will receive an exclusive anonymous press release. Dominic continued, relentlessly stepping closer until his knees brushed against the edge of the mattress. It will announce that Dominic Russo has secretly married. You will no longer be Harper Hayes, the vulnerable waitress from the Gold Coast. You will be Harper Russo, the matriarch of the most powerful criminal organization in the Midwest. When Rossi's men see your name, they won't see a $2 million payday. They will see a guaranteed death sentence. The bounty will evaporate overnight. You want me to fake a marriage with you? Harper choked out, utterly horrified and entirely captivated by the sheer audacity of the plan. Dominic, that's insane. I don't know anything about this world. I can't pretend to be a mafia wife. You don't have to pretend, Dominic said smoothly, his voice dropping into a dark hypnotic register. He flipped the velvet box open with his thumb. Nestled inside the dark velvet was a breathtaking, flawless 6-carat emerald-cut diamond ring set in a solid platinum Cartier band. It caught the dim light of the bedroom flashing with blinding cold brilliance. It was a ring worth more than the entire block of apartments Harper used to live in. There will be no pretending, Harper, Dominic said, his gray eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. A fake marriage does not offer real protection. The paperwork will be filed with the Cook County Clerk's office by a judge I own. The vows will be binding. You will legally take my name. You will wear my ring. You will stand by my side in public. We will be husband and wife in the eyes of the law, the church, and the commission. I can't, Harper gasped, tears springing to her eyes. You can't just buy my entire life. You paid for my mother's chemotherapy, and I agreed to be Leo's nanny. I agreed to stay in this house. I didn't agree to sign my soul over to a mob boss. Dominic reached out his blood-stained fingers gently but firmly, gripping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was shockingly warm, sending a dangerous electric thrill straight down her spine. You saved my son's life twice, Dominic murmured, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. You fought off an assassin with your bare hands. You are already in this world, Harper. You are already drowning in it. The only question now is whether you want to drown as a victim or rule as a queen. If you wear this ring, nobody on this earth will ever have the power to hurt you or your mother again. I will be your shield, and you will be my son's. Harper stared up into his stormy eyes. She hated the logic. She hated the absolute suffocating control he wielded, but she also saw the raw, desperate father beneath the blood and the bespoke suits. He was doing this to protect Leo. He was doing this to protect her. Her hands trembled as she looked down at the massive Cartier diamond. It was beautiful, heavy, and terrifying, much like the man offering it. What happens when Leo gets better? Harper whispered, her voice breaking. What happens when you kill Victor Rossi and the war is over? Do we just divorce? Dominic's jaw locked. His thumb slowly traced the line of her jaw, his gaze darkening with a sudden overwhelming possessiveness that had nothing to do with tactics or cartels. In the Russo family, Harper, Dominic whispered, leaning in so close his lips brushed against her ear, sending a shiver of pure fire through her veins. There is no such thing as divorce, only death. When you put this ring on, you are mine until the grave. I am mine until the grave, Dominic had said. Harper looked down at the sparkling Cartier ring. The silence in her bedroom was broken only by a ticking clock. Her life as an ordinary citizen was dead. Refusing meant facing a bounty. Accepting meant marrying a monster. But in Dominic's gray eyes, she saw safety for her mother and the little boy sleeping nearby. Put it on me, Harper whispered, her voice steadying as she made her choice. Dominic didn't hesitate. He took her delicate right hand and slid the heavy platinum band onto her ring finger. The metal was ice cold against her skin, a physical manifestation of the blood pact she had just signed. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the library of the Lake Forest estate became a legal war room. The leather-bound volumes bore witness to a ceremony dripping with survival. Judge Donald Briggs, a powerful official from the Cook County Circuit Court, stood behind a mahogany desk. He wore his black judicial robes, his hands trembling as he reviewed the marriage license. Matteo and Enzo stood by the double doors as the sole witnesses. Harper wore an elegant cream silk dress, her dark hair pinned back loosely. Dominic stood beside her in a pristine midnight blue suit, the split knuckles on his right hand the only evidence of the horrors he had inflicted hours earlier. By the authority vested in me by the state of Illinois, Judge Briggs announced, his voice echoing in the vast, quiet room, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sign here, Mrs. Russo. Harper took the heavy fountain pen. Her hand shook as she signed her name officially, binding her soul to the Chicago underworld. Within 30 minutes, Dominic's vast public relations machine went to work. The Chicago Tribune published a breaking news alert that sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of the city's elite. Bloomberg and the Chicago Sun-Times immediately picked up the story. Reclusive billionaire and logistics magnate Dominic Russo announces secret marriage to Harper Hayes. The tactical effect was instantaneous. On the dark web forums and encrypted channels used by the city's hitmen, the $2 million bounty on the Waitress vanished into thin air. To touch Harper now meant activating the ancient laws of Omerta. The ruling Mafia commission in New York issued an immediate encrypted decree to all 5 families. Dominic Russo's wife was off limits. Anyone who drew blood would face total annihilation by the combined forces of the American syndicate. But the illusion of safety shattered before the ink on the marriage certificate could fully dry. Matteo entered the library, his face grimmer than usual. He held a secure satellite phone. "Boss, we have the forensic data back from the encryption breach on Leo's tracking device. It wasn't an outside hack." Dominic's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Go on." The cloned SIM card that allowed Victor Rossi's men to pinpoint Leo's location at the cafe was authorized using an internal administrative bypass code. Matteo explained, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "A code that only 3 people in this organization possess, Yumi and Lawrence Barrett." Harper gasped. Lawrence Barrett was Dominic's chief financial officer and closest childhood friend, a man who managed the multi-billion-dollar legitimate corporate fronts of the Russo empire through Wintrust Financial and Northern Trust banking channels. "Lawrence," Dominic murmured, a terrifyingly calm smile stretching across his face. It was the smile of a predator that had just located its prey. "Where is he?" "He's currently at his penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria on Walton Street," Matteo replied, unholstering his weapon. "He's scheduled to board a private flight to Zurich in 2 hours. "Cancel his flight," Dominic ordered, his voice dripping with lethal malice. "Bring him to the Calumet warehouse. I want him to watch what happens to his partner." Dominic turned to Harper. He walked over to her, his massive frame blocking out the light from the library's stained glass windows. He reached down and gently touched the Cartier ring on her finger. "You stay here with Leo. The estate is locked down. Enzo has 30 men patrolling the inner perimeter. I have to go to the Calumet River shipping yards to end this war with Victor Rossi. When I return, the threat to our family will be gone permanently." "Our family?" Harper repeated the words, tasting strange but surprisingly heavy on her tongue. She looked up at him, realizing that despite his terrifying nature, he was the only thing standing between her and a violent death. "Please don't get killed." Dominic's gray eyes flared with a sudden dark intensity. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a brief possessive kiss that tasted of mint and raw power. "A Russo does not die so easily, modern-day queen. Keep your eyes on our boy." With that, Dominic turned and strode out of the library, his long black cashmere coat billowing behind him like the wings of a dark angel. Matteo followed closely at his heels, leaving Harper alone in the echoing silence of the massive fortress, holding her breath as the brutal drums of war began to beat across the frozen city of Chicago. The rain over the Calumet River docks was unrelenting, mixing with the thick industrial smog of Chicago's far south side. At 2 a.m. 3, black armored Cadillac Escalades tore into the abandoned shipping yard owned by the Rossi Syndicate. The high-beam headlights cut through the pitch darkness, illuminating rows of rusted shipping containers and the dark, churning waters of the river. Dominic Russo stepped out of the lead vehicle carrying a heavy, tactical Benelli M4 shotgun. Behind him, 20 elite Russo soldiers poured out of the SUVs, moving in a flawless, synchronized tactical diamond formation. Inside the main warehouse, Victor Rossi sat behind a reinforced steel desk, frantically poring over maps of Dominic's territory. He thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know his insider, Lawrence Barrett, had already been captured by Matteo's advance team. Suddenly, the heavy corrugated iron doors of the warehouse exploded inward. A deafening blast of flashbangs shattered the windows, plunging the room into absolute chaos. Smoke filled the air as the rapid rhythmic chatter of automatic gunfire erupted. Dominic moved through the smoke like an unholy phantom. He fired with lethal precision, dropping Rossi's bodyguards before they could even unholster their weapons. The sheer violence of the assault was absolute. Within 10 minutes, the warehouse was silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the steady dripping of rain from the shattered roof. Dominic kicked open the door to the upper office. Victor Rossi stood by the window, his face pale with terror, holding a silver revolver with a trembling hand. Beside him, tied to a wooden chair with his face bloodied, was Lawrence Barrett. "It's over, Victor," Dominic said smoothly, stepping into the room and lowering his shotgun. His face was splattered with rain and blood, his gray eyes shining with an icy predatory light. "You think you won because you married that waitress," Rossi snarled, his voice cracking with desperation. "The commission won't let you keep this territory. Lawrence told me everything your empire is built on a house of cards. The commission sanctioned my marriage 3 hours ago." Victor, Dominic replied, taking a slow, menacing step forward. I transferred 20% of your shipping docks directly to the New York family's front corporations. They don't care about you anymore. You are entirely obsolete. Dominic turned his gaze to Lawrence Barrett, his childhood friend. And as for you, Lawrence, treason carries a heavy price in this family. Before Lawrence could beg for mercy, Dominic raised his custom Sig Sauer pistol. 2 muffled shots echoed through the office. First Lawrence, then Victor Rossi fell to the floor, their blood pooling together on the cold concrete. The war for Chicago was officially over. As the first pale light of dawn began to break over Lake Michigan, the armored motorcade rolled back through the heavy iron gates of the Lake Forest estate. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, fog-laden morning. Harper had not slept a single wink. She stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of Leo's bedroom, her hands clutching a warm mug of tea, her eyes fixed on the driveway. When she saw Dominic step out of the vehicle, a profound, unexpected wave of relief washed over her. He was limping slightly, his midnight blue suit ruined and stained with dark streaks, but he was alive. He walked up the grand staircase and pushed open the door to Leo's room. He stopped in the doorway, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the plush carpet. He looked exhausted, the weight of the night's brutality etched into the sharp lines of his face. Harper set her tea down and walked slowly toward him. She didn't shrink away from the faint smell of gunpowder and copper that clung to his clothes. Instead, she reached out her fingers, gently touching his arm where a bullet had grazed his forearm through his torn sleeve. "You're hurt," she whispered, her hazel eyes searching his face with genuine concern. "It's nothing," Dominic murmured, his voice incredibly deep and raspy. He looked down at her hand, noticing that she was still wearing the 6-carat Cartier diamond ring. A strange, rare warmth flickered in his gray eyes. "Victor Rossi is dead. Lawrence Barrett has been dealt with. The syndicate is secure, and the bounty on your head is buried forever. You are safe, Harper. You and your mother." Just then, a soft voice called out from the bed. "Dad, Harpy." They both turned. Leo was sitting up, the color fully returned to his small cheeks. The medical monitors beside him showed a perfectly normal, steady heart rate. He looked at his father, then at Harper, his intelligent eyes catching the identical platinum bands gleaming on their fingers. "Are you staying forever now, Harpy?" Leo asked, a hopeful, bright smile breaking across his tiny face. Harper looked up at Dominic. The ruthless Mafia Don was looking down at her, not as a boss commanding an asset, but as a man offering his entire world. The contract was binding, the vows were real, and the protection was absolute. She was no longer the poor, invisible waitress drowning in debt. She was the matriarch of the Russo family. Harper walked over to the bed, taking Leo's small hand in hers, while Dominic placed his heavy, warm hand over both of theirs, sealing their new reality. "Yes, Leo," Harper said firmly, a brilliant, confident smile lighting up her face as she looked into the eyes of her husband. "I'm staying here forever." What a breathtaking end to an unforgettable journey. Harper started as a broke waitress and ended up as the protected queen of Chicago's most powerful empire. Her bravery saved a little boy's life and captured the heart of the city's most dangerous man. If you were thrilled by the intense drama, the unexpected betrayals, and the incredible twists of this real-life mafia romance story, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow story lovers. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss another epic tale. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.